All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Jhana Li. Hi, Jhana. How are you?
Hi, I am so good. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really good to have you. I'm excited that you're here as well. You were introduced to me through Marcel Petipa from Parakeeto, who we
Shout
love
out.
around here. So I'm very excited to have you on the
Yes.
series and to dig into your expertise and everything today.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So just a few words first. So we are live with Remote Leadership Unleashed, and this is where we explore expert perspectives on hiring, managing, and scaling distributed teams and companies. So I'm delighted to have Jhana with us to dig into her expertise and to have all of you who are joining us live with us as well for another episode that's going to be filled with valuable insights and actionable strategies. But first, I would just want to say a couple words about Quickly Hire. Quickly Hire is the fastest way to add vetted freelancers to your team. At Quickly Hire, we understand the importance of assembling top tier talent for your business. Whether you need a developer, content marketer, designer, virtual assistant, really any kind of technical or creative professional, we've got you covered. Our platform connects you with highly vetted freelancers who match your budgets and requirements, ensuring you find the perfect fit for your team. So if you have any questions about working with Quickly Hire, finding talent through Quickly Hire, reach out to me, Emily at quicklyhire.com, and I'd love to have that conversation. So let's get back to why we're here. Jhana Li is the founder of Spyglass Ops. Jhana first stepped into the role of COO for seven-figure agency, which I'm sure a lot of our folks in the audience are familiar with. And this was while she was embracing the van life across North and South America, which I love. And then with her extensive experience as COO, she went on to become head operations coach at Agency Lab. And there she guided hundreds of companies on their journey to scaling towards 7 and 8 figures. Also, while she's been the founder of Spyglass Ops. So that was after witnessing, and correct me if I'm off base here at all, but after witnessing all the struggles that founders face and inadequate operations, you launched Spyglass Ops to offer crucial operations consulting, recruitment, and training. And basically, your mission is to empower founders to not only scale their business effectively, but reclaim personal freedom, which I
Yes.
love. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's a big struggle.
it is.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to jump into remote team management. First, anything you want to add to your bio there, or anything I missed?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, but I am so excited for this conversation, Emily, because I think the real hidden key of these things, operations, like building remote teams and achieving personal freedom, all come down to this one core skill set, which is leadership. So I'm really excited to dive into this.
Awesome. Well, as you know, I'm sure you're aware in your experience that we've touched on, managing a remote team is different than managing a team in an office,
Yeah.
and it can be a challenge for a lot of people. So, I'd love to hear one of the big challenges is maintaining motivation across the team, and how do you
Mm,
know if a team is motivated or if a team member is motivated, and how
yeah.
do you keep that going? So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and any tips you have there.
Yeah. I think that remote leadership, it just puts more pressure on leadership to be really intentional with how they show up and lead. So in the case of motivation, right? I can, if I work in an office, go into the office, I can see how many people show up on time. I can see how hard they're working. I can get a feel for like the energy in the office, and are people lit up and turned on, or is somebody kind of like leaning back in their chair and clearly watching Netflix on the side, right? Like motivation is something that can just happen more naturally, more organically, and without intentional effort. In a remote environment, we don't get any of those perks. We have to we have to find another way to motivate our team. We have to find another way to know whether or not our team is motivated, because you can't peer over people's shoulder. You can't read their body language as they go through their working day. So how do we know whether a team is motivated or not? And how do we create motivation when we can't, like give somebody a face-to-face pep talk? So the biggest game changer for me when I was trying to answer this question for myself was when I read the book Drive by Daniel Pink. There's a TED talk on it. I'd highly recommend it. But he draws the distinction between two types of motivation. He has extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation is what most management theory focuses on, right? It's carrots and sticks. It's raises and promotions, or like consequences and punishment. And it's extrinsic motivators are all of the things outside of me, around me, that act on me and try to move my motivation towards a carrot or away from a stick. That's extrinsic motivation. I think we all know what those look like and how to use them. But the real kicker is that they're actually not that effective. When you measure what gets the most performance and motivation out of people, it's not a raise. It's not the chance of a promotion. These are actually measurably not what produces the greatest result. What produces the greatest result is what he calls intrinsic motivators, which are the motivation that comes from within us. So we as leaders have the opportunity to learn, how do we create an environment of intrinsic motivation? How do we systematically, intentionally build intrinsic motivation into our team? And if you pour all of your energy and focus into that, you can then trust that your team is going to show up to work every day really, really motivated and excited to do the work, even if you can't see them.
I love that. I think it's really powerful. And I think it can also be difficult to come up with those intrinsic motivators, right? So I'd love to hear, what were the ways that you wove that into your management experiences?
So there's essentially 3 core pillars of intrinsic motivation. And again, you can deep dive into the book or the TED Talk to kind of go deeper into this concept. But the pillars are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So running through those really quickly. Autonomy is the intrinsic motivation that comes from having the freedom of choice and the freedom of control over one's own life. I think the clearest example we saw of this was like the Great Resignation. When everybody was being forced back into the office, they felt like their autonomy was being taken away. And it was so demotivating and frustrating that people literally quit over it, right? So not creating an environment where your team has autonomy is deeply demotivating. But the flip side is also true. If you can systematically work autonomy into your company culture, that creates motivation within each member of your team. So that can tactically look like everything from having, like flexible hours as opposed to time tracking your team. So as opposed to making sure that everybody shows up at 9 and they're working until 5, right? That takes away their autonomy and their freedom of choice versus saying, work any hours that you want to, get the work done. My expectation is that the work is done and you take as much time as you need to make that happen. That's an autonomy-based time policy. Same thing with like vacations, right? You can take exactly these holidays and exactly this much time off, or we have an unlimited time off policy. So these are the decisions that we as leaders get to make to introduce autonomy at a company-wide level. And then at an individual level, I always say autonomy is around focusing on the what instead of the how. Our job as leaders is to focus on the what and define what success looks like for our team. At the individual level, what does success look like in your individual role and your contribution to this business? I will define and set a finish line for you to run towards. But then you get to have the autonomy to decide how you're going to run the race, right? You get to decide how you deliver on my expectations. And that's where autonomy gets introduced at the individual level. So that's autonomy. Any questions or wanting to dive
No,
deeper?
I love it. I think it's great.
Okay.
We can let's go through the 3 pillars, and then I do have a couple follow-up questions there. Yeah.
Great. So that's autonomy. That's number 1. Mastery is the intrinsic motivation that comes from the desire to grow, to progress, to feel good at something, to feel like you're working and growing towards something. So mastery is building an individual growth plan for each person at your company. And when we have the advantage of being small and having small teams, we really can do this at an individual level. So I know what the individual goals are for every single person across my team. I know whether what motivates them is the ability to one day buy a car or move out of their parents' house or, take their kids on a vacation to Australia. I know that at the individual level, and I build the growth of this person and I align it with what intrinsically motivates them, where they want to grow into. So essentially all I'm saying is, hey, you're on this journey and you're going to grow within this company. Growth for you looks like doing your role at its very best, showing up and hitting these targets, working on these skills, mastering and learning these new competencies, right? So every single person at my team is getting constructive feedback from me all the time on here's where you get to grow next. Here's what the next layer of growth looks like for you. And when you've created that environment where people perceive themselves to be showing up every single day to grow, as opposed to just do the work, they're there to grow and get better. That is intrinsically motivating. So that's mastery and making sure that everybody feels that, not just like the desire to grow, but they also see a pathway in front of them for them to grow within your business.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely.
Love that. And then the third one is purpose, right? Purpose is the desire for your work to matter for you to be a part of something meaningful, of something bigger than yourself, right? This is why nonprofits can get away with paying their people terribly, is because people actually care more about doing meaningful work than they do about getting paid a lot of money. And so purpose is things like your company vision and mission, your company core values, right? Like why, and it's even something as simple as just making sure that your team feels seen and feels valued, right? If I show up to a working environment where I know my boss really gives a damn about me as an individual, that is purpose, because I want to turn around and I want to give that back to them and to this team that I love. So, these nice buzzwords of vision and mission and core values, these aren't just nice to haves. They're very strategic tools that we as leaders can implement to create and manufacture purpose. And the goal of that is to introduce more intrinsic motivation into your team.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's really important to remember, because I think there are a lot of companies that prioritize setting up some core values and a mission statement, and then they forget about it, right?
Totally.
Because
Yes.
it's not something you think about day to day and when you're doing all the planning, but you should. And when you do, it guides you along the way, and it gives you a foundation to lean on when you're implementing these goals for your team to strive toward. So really great advice there.
And I always say, Emily, like, I think the pushback around things like core values or vision or mission is like, I don't understand how that's going to make me money. And that's a totally fair objection, right? Like, why would you do anything if it's not going to make you money? So to put some numbers to that, high performance teams, meaning like deeply intrinsically motivated teams, are on average 2.1x more productive than your average performing team. So as a leader, you will literally be able to cut your labor costs in half. You will be able to get the same work done with half the people if your team is showing up intrinsically motivated every single day. And the cost of that is zero. It is free. It is totally free for you to become the leader that understands intrinsic motivation and how to create it in your business. So you're getting twice the output for free. That to me is amazing ROI. Versus having to, like, if your only motivation tactic is to just shell out more and more money and give people constant promotions and raises, that is very expensive for a fraction of the output change that you will actually see. So between extrinsic and intrinsic is where you get a better bang for buck. And that's why I think it's important to learn these skills.
I love that. I think going back to the first pillar of autonomy, that can be complicated for folks who are managing a remote team, right? Because a lot of times when you hire a new team member, you don't have just inherent trust in them, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And developing that trust to then give the autonomy is very important.
Yes.
So I would love to hear what your thoughts are on how do you gauge that in the hiring process? And then once you bring on a team member, how long do you kind of give a short or long rope in that before saying, hey, this isn't working?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So autonomy in the hiring process, I think the biggest and best way that we do that is we make our hiring process hard, and we give our candidates an opportunity to, we give them guidance, but we don't give them a clear directive. So let me give you a tactical example. We do a skill assessment in our hiring funnel. And this is by far the best thing we ever introduced to our hiring process. We give a skill assessment. It's a couple of big, crunchy questions that are relevant and related to this person's role. It allows us to stress test whether this person has the raw capability to do the job or not. But what we tell them essentially is like, here's this big question. Film a Loom video response answering XYZ sub bullets and include any visual aids that you may or may not have. That's all we're telling them. And then some candidates will show up and submit a 2-minute Loom video and have no visual aid. And it's very clear that they spent 10 minutes, they threw it together and they submitted it. We've had candidates who have put together a 45-slide PowerPoint presentation and a 30-minute Loom video walkthrough, right? So what we did in the hiring process is we gave people this big, wide open green field to run in. We said, run. And then we saw what they did. So I'm looking for the candidates that when given that much autonomy, they show up and they over deliver. They show up and they do an absolutely excellent job, not because I asked them to, but because that's who they are. That's how we test for autonomy on the front end. And then on the back end, there is a difference between, I always say, like, delegation is not the same thing as abdication, right? When I delegate something and I give you autonomy over something, that doesn't mean I'm just dropping it in your lap and then flying away and never touching it again. I'm still actively showing up to support you in that role. I'm just not telling you how to do it. I'm not doing it for you. I'm challenging you and pushing you to figure out how to do it for yourself. So in an onboarding process, I will create time. I will have 30 minutes set aside every single day for the first 2 weeks to just be available to that individual, right? But the trick is I'm not telling them, I'm not leading that meeting. They're leading the meeting. They're telling me, I was looking at this yesterday and I'm confused and I have a clarifying question. Or I was thinking about doing it this way. What are your thoughts? What am I missing, right? They're bringing to the table their ideas. They're exercising their autonomy. But I'm staying very much in the loop by making myself available on this very, very tight feedback loop. So daily touch points for the first 2 weeks, then I back it off to weekly, and I continue to meet with my team on an individual basis weekly for like the next 6 months minimum. And I'm not telling them how to do their job in those meetings. I'm challenging them to continuously grow and level up. I'm pointing out where they have room for growth or where they could have done something differently. I'm offering them constructive feedback, but they're the person who's telling me, here's where I'm blocked. Here's what I'm working on next. What do you think about this? They take ownership and autonomy for their role.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really practical, actionable advice there. And I think a lot of folks can learn from that. So thank you for being so detailed and forthcoming with how you handle this.
Yeah.
Are there any red flags that when you're hiring, when you're or when you're working with your team, are there any red flags you're like, ooh, this, I don't think this is going to work? Or if it's in the hiring process, you say, nope, out. Anything like that is sort of a make it or break it?
Yeah. I would say like company wide, the single biggest red flag to me is going to be core values misalignment. So same thing on the hiring funnel. We are filtering for and stress testing for our core values before we let anybody into the company, period. And you are not getting through the door if you are not core values aligned, ideally. And then we have this very intense 30-day onboarding process where we're essentially stress testing this new hire. And we're also giving them deep, deep exposure to our company culture and our core values. And if at any point in those first 30 days, I'm seeing behavior that they are not intrinsically aligned with our core values, automatic deal breaker. And it's the one fireable offense. No matter how long you work with me, if you are not showing up in alignment with the core values, you get like one warning and then you are out, because I do not tolerate anybody being a toxic presence in my culture. Pretty much everything else I perceive to be a growth opportunity. So if we make a mistake, even if it costs me a ton of money, my first response to that is, what did you learn from this? How are you going to grow for this? How are you going to make sure this never happens again? It's not, you made a mistake, you're out. And so really, I believe that if I put the right people in the right seats, they've got the right skills and competency, they've got the intrinsic motivation, and their core values aligned, there's very few things a person can do that would make me want to fire them. I might outgrow them. Their growth may not keep pace with the growth of my business. I might have to let them go for that reason. But there's not a red flag, so to speak, that I am always on the lookout for.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the concept of the business outgrowing the people, right? Yeah. A lot of times you think of it in the other way, sure. but it can happen. It can happen both ways. And it's important to keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we're rounding up on 20 minutes here. This has been a very focused conversation, which I love. So yeah. I think this is great, actionable advice for what we've talked about, motivating a remote team. But let's say folks who are listening to this, watching the recording, what is maybe 1 or 2 or 3, whatever you want to go with here, kind of take away your best tips for managing a remote team? Someone who's thinking, I don't want to do it anymore. It's too hard. I'm going to start hiring locally. I want to get back to face-to-face. What would you say to those people?
First off, I would say you're not objectively wrong or right to want to lead an in-person team. I think it comes back entirely to you as an individual. I know some people that really, really feed off of a office environment, right? Intrinsically, what motivates them is to get to show up and like go out to drinks with their coworkers after work. Like it's important to them. And so if you're the founder and that's you're the founder. You set the rules. You get to decide to create a company that fuels and feeds you. That is our unique right as entrepreneurs. And so you're not intrinsically wrong for wanting to create an in-person environment if that's what really lights you up. Just recognize that you're working with a limited talent. Like there's pros and cons to that decision, just as with going remote. What I don't think is an adequate reason to go back into the office is that it's quote unquote easier, right? It was easier for me to keep an eye on everyone. It was easier for me to make sure all the work was getting done. To me, that's a lazy response, right? Because there's a set of skills that you can learn and master to become an incredible remote leader. And you're listening to this podcast, which makes me think that you want to develop and learn those skills. So while it might be hard to take advantage of all of the opportunities that working with the global workforce affords us, to me, the pro con there is like, cool, I have to learn some skills, but then I get to unlock maximum benefit. I don't think it's hard is a good enough reason to go back into the office.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. And I think folks can think about that too, because there are a lot of factors that go into that, right? There's office space. There's, if you're hiring full-time members versus fractional and all the things that go into it and where you're based and cost prohibitive things there as well. Jhana, thank you so very much for your time today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so actually the best place to connect with me directly is on Instagram. At the Jhana Li is my handle. And please DM me with your biggest takeaway from this episode, a big question that's glaring to you coming out of this episode. And that's also where I drop like the most free value add content that I'm able to provide.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jhana. Thank you everyone who's watching. Feel free to comment on this and go find Jhana at the Jhana Li on Instagram for more great tips and advice and all of the great knowledge that she shares there on operations for your business. She's the real deal, so go check her out. Thank you so much, Jhana. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Emily.